Welcome back, everybody. Thank you for watching another video. So it's finally time for me to replace the rack and pinion in my 1998 Corolla. Just remember, guys, I'm just a DIYer. None of this should be considered professional advice. If you're not comfortable doing any of these repairs, go seek help from a true mechanic. Now, before starting the repair, here are some things to consider. Number one, you might want to flush out the power steering system before you install a new one. You can always do it afterwards, but I think it's a good idea to flush everything out beforehand. And then another thing you might want to think about are all of the parts that you might want to replace because we're already doing this repair. For example, your power steering fluid reservoir, it might be old, could be brittle, it might spring a leak later on and it's dirty, so you want to stop that dirt from getting into the new system, so you might as well replace that. I had to replace my supply lines because power steering fluid was seeping through them, and we're going to be removing the rear engine mount, so you might also do that if you haven't done that already. And any part that's attached to your suspension, like your tie rods, your sway bar links, things like that, just kind of think about that as you're doing the repair. First thing you want to do is drain the power steering fluid from the system. Now, if you're thinking about using a turkey baster, kind of difficult there, so you're going to have to sneak a hose down in there. What I did was just unhook the hoses from the rack and just let it leak out the bottom and catch it in a pan. Now, you can remove about 80% of the things that you need to get to without jacking up the car. And I prefer to do that because it's safer. You don't have to worry about getting up on stools and worry about the car being up on jack stands. So let me show you how I did that. First thing I did was remove the battery. You're going to have a 10mm hex bolt right here. So you're going to need a 10mm ratchet and an open box wrench, also 10mm. And then you can remove your battery. Next, we're going to remove the air box. It's going to be sitting right here, but before touching anything, you're going to look to the right side of it and you're going to remove three things. Now, on the right side of your air box, you're going to remove this sensor, this hose, and this bracket right here that's going to be attached to it, and that's going to be a 10mm nut. Here's a plan for taking out your air box. The first thing you're going to do is loosen up the clamp that's holding the hose down. Then next up, what you want to do is just flip these two clips down, and then you're going to lift this top cover off. And here's where you got to be a little bit careful because sometimes these hinges get very brittle. So you want to take your time in lifting it. And then once you get it free of these hinges, you can just wiggle the hose free. And then it'll just look like that with your air filter down here. You can see the intake hose is still in place. Then at the bottom of the air box, you have three 10mm bolts holding it in, so you need a 10mm ratchet with an extension. Now, I don't know if it's necessary to remove all of this. I just wanted as much room as possible to put wrenches and hands in to get to the two supply lines down at the rack where that little blue paper towel is right there. Here's one of your engine mounts, by the way. Next up, we're going to go after the rubber boot that's covering the knuckle that was right there. Here's a look at the rubber boot that is covering the steering knuckle. It is held into place by 5 10mm bolts. And because we removed the air box, it's very easy to get your arms and hands in there. Just a 10mm ratchet with a 3-inch extension will do. Once you got it loose, all you got to do is tilt it sideways like this and move it to the left, and it'll come out. All right, let's go after those supply hoses now, which can be a little bit difficult, but with the right tools, I think it'll be okay. So let me drop you guys right in here. Okay, I'll turn you guys sideways. So right there is where the rubber boot was. And what we're gonna do, I've already disconnected them, but right there, these two holes, there and there, are where the hoses connect. And let me show you what tools I use to get them out. Alright, as you're starting your tippy-toe ballet routine to look into your engine bay, you're going to notice two hoses that are plugged into the rack. This one is going to be on the inside, which is closer to the cabin, and there's one on the outside, which is closer to the headlights. Now, I noticed that there was a hose coming from the passenger side into this one, so to make more space, what I did was I just unclipped the hose, pulled it out, and just left that plugged into the rack. Alright guys, this next tip is going to save you guys a lot of heartache and sorrow. So the outside bolt for the hose is a different size than the inside. And I'm not sure if it says it in the repair manuals. I don't have one of those and nowhere online did I find it. But that's a 17mm flare nut. Slip it on there. Look at all the play. in there. And the last thing you want to do is round those out. So when you're going after the outside one, make sure you got a 16mm wrench or 5/8. All right, so here's the two different methods I use to remove the outside hose, because once you remove the outside one, the inside one is very easy to break loose. So first time I did it, I used this 5/8 stubby, and when you're looking down at the hose, you can't tell, but it's slanted in a way where you can get the handle of a wrench in there. So once you figure out how to get a good bite in it, got it locked in, and I had a long metal pole and I just hammered it down until I broke it loose. So that's one way you can do that. And then the second time I broke it free, I had this 5/8 flare nut wrench with a little bit of offset there. And the length is going to be important, right? You can't have it too long. So this measures about 7.5 inches. So right about there or a little bit shorter would be good. It gives you enough space to fit it on there and give you enough leverage to break it free. All right, guys, that's pretty much everything we need to remove from the driver's side, with the exception of two things: the one bolt that's holding in the steering knuckle and the one bolt that's underneath the rack, which is attached to the bracket, but we're going to save those for last. Let's go to the passenger side. All right, we're on the passenger side, and we're going to remove your cruise control actuator because these lines are blocking this space, and we need to remove 3 different heat shields. Really easy removal. Just got to remove 3 10mm bolts and 1 electrical connector, which I just kind of hit up here. And we're going to just move this on the side. Now we got all this space. Okay, here's a look at the heat shield that goes around your exhaust manifold. You have 6 bolts and they are 12mm. This one is going to be a little bit tricky to remove. So is this one, because it's going to be facing this way and you're going to be reaching around this way. So it helps to have a ratcheting 12mm offset wrench. Then you got this guy that's on the firewall, really easy. You got 2 10mm bolts here and then 1 10mm bolt on the bottom. That one's going to be real easy to come out. And the last one you got is attached to the rack and pinion area. You got 2 10mm bolts here and here. Now, the way you get this out is you're going to be looking at it like this from this angle, right? So this is the passenger side, that's the driver's side. It's going to be sitting like this. You got to slide it down like this underneath the car, push it out toward the driver's side, and then lift it out that way. So if you're looking at it from the front of the car, like this, to the driver's side, and out that way toward passenger. Hope that helps. Well, all right, guys, we've pretty much removed everything we can from the top right now. The only thing holding in the rack right now is that bracket right there. And there's a bolt on the top and a bolt on the bottom, and we can get to it from up here. And there's another one right over there. We can get to the top one, but not the bottom. We're going to have to do that when we lift the car. Also, a good idea to remember to order replacement bushings for those, because you don't want to use the old ones. Now, we got to keep it in place. We can't remove it yet because we want to make sure that we remove the tie rod ends from the tires first. Then we can kind of go about releasing these and getting out the rack. Before getting into the second part of this video, just want to let you guys know some important things. So I'm only replacing the rack and pinion. So you only need to replace the things that I'm doing here. And I'm not removing the subframe completely. I'm just removing some bolts so it can open up, so it can have access to the rear engine mount. I'm using 2 3-ton jacks from Harbor Freight, and they're not even extended. They're just on its lowest height, and you just need enough space that you can fit under there. And that's it. All right, guys, here is where the fun begins. I got the car up, tires are off, and I just want to show you this opening right here is where we're going to be pulling out the rack. And the first thing we got to do is take off these outer tie rods. First thing we got to do is remove this 19mm jam nut. Then on the bottom of the outer tie rod is a 17mm castle nut. And don't forget to remove the cotter pin. You can just take that out by hand. And don't forget, guys, when you're backing out your outer tie rod, count how many rotations you got so you know how many rotations to reinstall it on the new inner tie rod. Quick note here, guys, when you loosen up the castle nut, leave a little bit on there so when you separate the tie rod from the knuckle, it has something to catch it on the bottom. And don't forget, guys, you got to do the same thing on the passenger side. All right, guys, this is what we look like. We're going to have all this space to yank out that rack. Now, my outer tie rod, I think it was probably the original ones that came with the car. The fluid from inside of the boot had leaked out and hardened around the knuckle, and it didn't matter how hard I hit it, it just wasn't coming out. So I had to get some pry bars, slip it in there, break that seal, and then it came out. But now we got all the space. Hey guys, I forgot to mention one thing about this jam nut. In order to loosen it, it's going to be to the right. And remember, it's still the same direction on the other side. Gonna bring you guys in really close here to show you something you may or may not have in your model Corolla. So you see this block right there. Let me get you in focus there. Okay, right here. That's a bumper mount. You might not have it in your car, but the motor mount is right back here. And I need to remove that so I can have access to that 17mm bolt. This is being held down by two 10mm bolts, in case you're wondering what that thing is, because some cars might not have it. Alright, since I've got all this space now and I can move this inner tie rod out of the way, I'm going to go after the 10mm bolt that's holding in that engine bumper. There you go, guys. That's what I'm talking about right there. And really quick, guys, it was a 12mm bolt. Alright, guys, this is what it looks like. So now that this is out of the way, I got a clear shot right at that 17mm bolt right there. I'm going to get a 15-inch extension and rip that thing out. Once you get under the car, this is the first thing that you're going to remove. It is attached onto another bolt, which I'm going to show you in just a little bit. It's being held in place by these two 14mm nuts. All right, we're now underneath the car on the passenger side, and this bolt right here is where the brace was attached. Now, there are 6 19mm bolts that we have to remove so we can lower the subframe, hopefully low enough so we can start to work the rack off. So you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and the same thing on the other side. All right, I pushed you guys just a little bit more forward. You can see the motor mount is right up here, and it's being held in place by these 3 17mm nuts. So we got to remove those. And I think this guy is another 19. And that should be all we need to wiggle it loose. All right, guys, I got a couple of really important tips before you start taking out the bolts from the subframe. Number one, have a way of organizing the bolts so you remember what holes they came out of, because they all have different lengths, different grades of strength, and most importantly, based on that, different torque specs when you put them back in. Now, the second thing you're going to need is something to support the subframe. I used a jack from my other car, and the reason you're going to need that is, as you're starting to loosen and take out the other bolts, the remaining bolts are going to get all the pressure from the subframe pushing it down. So if you have something supporting it, it makes it a lot easier to take out the remaining bolts, and I'm pretty sure I didn't do that, and I might have grinded some of those holes, so really important. And you're going to do the same thing when you reinstall all of the bolts. You're going to raise up that jack or whatever you got to help line up the holes. And that way, the threads of the bolt aren't doing all of the grabbing. A great example is when I was trying to pull out the bolt from the rear engine mount. I had a little bit too much height on the jack and it wasn't coming out. So I had to lower it and it just slid right out. And the last bit of advice, when you go to reinstall everything, you're going to start with the rear engine mount, hold it in place, hand tighten the bolt through, and then hand tighten everything else. And don't forget to put the rubber guard back onto the right side of the engine mount. So if the engine is here, the engine mount is here, the rubber protection goes on this side. And you need to have that there because the exhaust is running this way, and that rubber acts as a heat shield to stop your engine mount from melting. So don't forget to install it on the right side. All right, guys, we made it. We are down to the last 5 bolts. One of them is going to be the bolt that's holding in the steering knuckle, and the last 4 will be the bolts attached to the brackets that are holding in the rack. Really important here, guys, before you remove that bolt, make sure that you lock down your steering wheel, because if you don't, you run the risk of damaging the clock spring mechanism in the steering wheel. And just as a quick review, the bolt that we're going to be removing is that gold one right there. To remove that bolt, it was just a 12mm on a ratchet. Here is a look at your mounting bracket on the passenger side, and it's mounted onto the firewall like this. The rack is sitting right in here. Now what you're going to see is a stud sticking right through here, and it's going to be holding this 17mm nut that you have to remove. Very easy just to reach over the fender and take this guy out. And then on the bottom hole, you're going to have this 17mm bolt Very easy to have access to this from under the car. Helps to have an extension and a ratchet and maybe one of those swivel adapters. Now the bracket for the passenger side is still stuck on the rack, but it's pretty much the same setup. You got these 3 bolts that you have to remove. For the top 2, I had to Superman from the passenger side over the engine to get these out. And for the bottom one was a little bit more tricky. Here's a look at the tools I used to remove that bottom bolt. So this is a 17mm offset wrench. I was able to slip that in there and break it free. So that measures about 11 inches long. Just enough to get past the subframe and break it free. Once I had it broken loose with this, I came in with the ratchet side of this. And because of where the bracket is positioned, you might have to angle this a little bit to get it going. Last thing to do is to remove the rack. Alright guys, here is the money shot you guys have been waiting for. So to get the rack out, all you're going to do is grab it and then pull it toward the driver's side. And then you're going to yank it up so that you got the inner tie rod just like that. And what you're trying to do is angle it up to a point where you can get the input shaft to exit out first. It's going to tilt down, exit out the hole, and it'll look something like this. And once you're here, all you got to do is twist it and pull it out. Well, alright guys, I hope this video helped out. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next video.